Because one of my favorite things about pastel is that it shows emotions better than oils or acrylics. It's very, very emotional. And what you lay down there holds that emotion and holds that interest. So if you're working and you're really depressed or something terrible has happened, it's going into your painting. You're showing it. So you have to know when to stop and do something else in the studio as well. There's not that much fill-in work with pastel. Every stroke shows. Oil, you can work back in a way that you can smooth things out. But pastel is so immediate that I find the hardest thing about working with pastel, it has to do with my mood. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So, the other thing is, I know pastel's about color, but it's also about drawing. Drawing is underneath all of our work. And this is a whole series I did. This is me when I was 4 years old in kindergarten. And this was a little science class about evaporation. And they said evaporation is invisible. You can't see it. And I vowed I was going to see evaporation. And every day I sat there and I stared at the water going down. And I knew I could see evaporation if I just concentrated hard enough. And what I succeeded in doing was put myself into a trance where the teacher, I remember saying, Margaret, Margaret. And I became obsessed by this vision of seeing the invisible. And this is kind of a theme of mine in what are we looking at? What am I seeing? What color is that shadow? There's not a right answer to that. But this concentration, this focus and attention is what I've been obsessed with. Now this was a series I did on, I've done a lot of work on the feminine, the feminine journey, and I was working at the O'Keeffe, teaching at the O'Keeffe at the time, and they wanted me to come up with a program for young girls, 10, 11, and 12, when they were about to go into the dreaded teenage years and, you know, have a hard time and forget how to do math, that sort of thing, how to strengthen the feminine. So I came up with a workshop called the Grandmothers Club. And I showed the girls how to draw a self-portrait that was life-size. And so if a kid was wearing glasses, you could say, oh, you're lucky, because look, you just put the glasses down and trace over them. And with each girl, being very careful to show them how to see themselves as an interesting face. Without, they'll all say, oh, but I don't like my eyebrows, I don't like this. You find something about them to show them that they're unique. And then we put tracing paper over them. And I had them draw themselves as a crabby 90-year-old lady and as a really happy 90-year-old lady, showing that it's a choice. And I used a photo of George O'Keeffe to define what 90 was. Shows on your face, and you've made those choices. So this is part of this series. I started drawing myself and turning myself 90, and these images, some of these images I'm going to show you are from that series. Oh, the other thing is, speaking to the right crowd here, I went to the Metropolitan Museum, look at my old favorites that I visit when I was a kid, and I thought they had changed the lights. I had cataracts. So all of these black and whites are the cataract years, okay? Until I got my vision back and I got my color back and I was back in business with pastel. Okay, now I acted all of these out. Now this one is the whole thing is called Patterns in the Fabric of Time. This one is called Imagining the Path of Inspiration. Now, these are, as a practice, are drawing and color choices, all of this. This is reading, dreaming, having the reflection that we actually had a raven that we called Edgar. That was it was a juvenile that it couldn't feed. And one day, my husband John knocked on the window, and there was this huge, but it was a juvenile, raven on his head. He was starving. And we fed him enough, we kept him wild, but he's our watcher. He's our very special watcher. So this is Edgar. And then me there is waiting, you're getting ready for the inspiration, but everything else is available. Now I know with pastel I'm a landscape painter, as a lot of you are. However, as you know, it's not just a landscape. It's how your vision is working at that moment, and you're pointing to something to show someone, look at that. My specialty was clouds. Look at that, look at that, look at that. And having judged shows, that makes a difference. If your painting says, look at that, and it's different from someone else's look at that, it sets you apart. So this is the, I also work in series. My husband's an abstract painter, and we've been together since college, and he got me started working big. So everything I'm going to show you of mine tends to be big. 32 by 40 is my favorite, and I've really pushed the boundaries by working triptychs. You just add them on, and the reason it's 3240, as you know, is that's the size of the largest board, pretty much. And glass over 40 inches costs extra, so they have that. Plus, you have to be able to lift it.
Is that pen and ink? Is that pen and ink there?
Pardon?
Is that pen and ink?
No, this is charcoal.
Oh.
There's charcoal underneath all of my work.
Oh, I see.
I do full drawings under all of my work.
Reminds me of Aubrey Beardsley.
Oh, thank you. Oh, the other thing is, you see the fabric in all of these. I'm heading somewhere with the fabric, but this is part of the journey of the feminine. Each fabric, it's so much fun to draw fabric, or to paint, or pastel fabric. It just as an exercise, get a shawl like this, drape it, and just do it with pastel. It's the perfect thing. De La Tour's work with the queen's dresses. It works in pastel better than oils. It's just fabulous. Okay, this is called Stirring Up Trouble. This is, now when I was showing, you know how hard it is to be judged, and when you have a show, they're going to tell you everything. And it's hard. Your ego, it's really hard on your ego. So I had to construct for myself a persona. And this is Maggie Muchmore here. And I was working in a shop 3 hours in the day, selling this clothing and jewelry. And this is back in this is 70s, 80s. And it was, my friend sold old Indian jewelry. It was so much fun. I got to try it all on. But this is a persona that did the shows and went out there in the world. Well, I retired her because I found out the persona doesn't grow old. It stays. It's not an actual person. So it doesn't grow old. So this is, Stirring Up Trouble is, my new name for it is Defy the Algorithm, okay? Being an artist, you are not part of the algorithm. That's the whole point. That's the whole point, that it's finding something different, finding something that is off the grid. And this is my image for that. Again, the pattern skirt. Okay, now I'm on to my work. You can see this is the drawing, Nicholas underneath everything. I use my favorite charcoal. It's the very large sticks. I don't know if you can see them, but this stick is just the best for working large. I love, now what this is something that I made this all up, by the way. I was taught when I was 10 how to use new pastels to do portraits. I had this lovely, wonderful lady who did portraits for people at the UN. And she was born in 1875, and she was just one of those wonderful old purple ladies. You know, she wore purple all the time, and she had white hair, and she smelled good. Mrs. Tyler, I adored her, and I wanted to be Mrs. Tyler. That's one of the reasons I started planning my old lady when I was very young. I had a grumpy granny and grumpy aunties who on Sunday when would drive around after church, they would say, "Why doesn't the Lord just take me?" This isn't good for a young girl. This just isn't good. So I vowed I would not be that old lady. But Mrs. Tyler was my old lady. And she taught me pastel. And she got me started on this. And she had a technique of strokes next to each other. And she would lay colors. She never mixed. She mixed with the colors next to each other. And they were just beautiful. They were full of life. She taught me all the tricks of portraiture. And then when I started landscape, I used her technique, but I could only do clouds that were going to the right. It was a real problem. Sorry, you know, it didn't work. So I began making up my, oh, that's better. I began making up my own way of working, and it's a very active, scribbly type of stroke. And keeping the life in my work is the most important thing. And you know when a painting goes dead, and you can do artificial respiration with a can of air. I assume you've all done that. When you overwork a corner, and you can hold your breath, spray it, and run away really fast. A can of air is really my favorite thing. And I also use erasers as much as I use pastels. I do the negative drawing with erasers. I'll show you more on that later. But this is Ghost Ranch. And I'll show you more on this. This is my studio. John came up with the idea of the gutter. See, that's a regular old gutter on the wall from oh, it sifts right into the gutter, and then you just vacuum it up. It's very good. And I put the pastels that I'm using in the gutter, and then I get a screen, and I can put the screen over them and vacuum, so you don't suck up your pastels. I also work, really important, on one of those pads, you know, from Office Max. If you're standing all day, it really makes a difference to stand on those pads. But I got through a long string of friends of my kids, etc. I was worked on the Georgia O'Keeffe film. I was Joan Allen's painting tech. And here I wind up, I was just supposed to show up in Abiquiu at 6:30 in the morning with all these trucks. And I was supposed to be telling Joan Allen how to act like an artist. And I was standing there all day. The reason I got in there is they needed someone who had done an academic portfolio. Because there's a scene in the movie where she burns all of her academic work. And so I gave them my stuff from college, and I did new stuff, and they liked it, and they hired me just to do something. Because they'd hired an artist and it didn't work out. So I was the one without the money. He got paid. I was the volunteer.
Oh,
We love it, but it can be really annoying. No, they did pay me, but not for the paintings that I did. So we're at Ghost Ranch, and Barbara Bueller-Lyons from the museum is telling everyone how Georgia O'Keeffe did it, and you weren't allowed to touch that. You had to walk in everyone else's footsteps. This is a film crew at the Ghost Ranch house. So, and they're saying, George O'Keeffe said, God gave her this mountain. And my hackles went up and I said, excuse me, this is not true. I came here when I was 21 years old to Ghost Ranch. It's why we're still here. And it's, George O'Keeffe does not own Abiquiu, even though they call it George O'Keeffe land and all of that. So this is my attempt to do Abiquiu with my vision. And what I did was I made a patchwork. You know when you take a photograph of the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, you look at it and it's this tiny little line, it's like, no, that's not what I saw. This is how your vision goes in, and this area is really interesting. And I've repeated parts. What I did was I made a patchwork of photos, and it took me a long time to get it right. And then I drew the photos. You'll see later about this, but this is my patchwork. Okay, there you go. The one on the left is how it looks done. And the one on the right is the Bosque del Apache. Now the Bosque, I assume most of you have been to the Bosque. It's like a Pastels paradise. Oh, it's so fabulous. You go this time of year, and the full moon, it's birdie Disneyland, because there's water that they put there, and it's six inches deep, and there are reflections. There's every color blue you can imagine, and the grasses, it's all really pastel stuff. It's scribble grasses. Oh. Anyhow, you watch the birds at night settle down, or they come in from the grain fields, and then in the morning they all take off. And over on the right you can see, when we were there this day, there were 44,000 Canada snow geese. And something like 60,000, no, it was the other way, the cranes were 40,000, the snow geese were 60. It's just spectacular. But I've broken it up into these sections, the patchwork there. These colors are a little too lurid. This working with digital, the colors can skew really fast. So it's more or less looks like that. But then I got to put, you see that red line here? Yeah. So much fun. That red line, when I'm not doing shows now, full shows now. I'm just showing out of my studio. But when I had to do a full show every year, I would put them all up on the wall when they were almost done and live with them. And then there's a day when you're really on. You can't do anything wrong. You're on. And that's when you put the red stripes in and you go nuts and finish the show on a good day. That's a mood thing too, the mood altering thing. I've completely abandoned my notes. I can't talk to you and read notes, so I'll look down every once in a while and see. Oh, I know, I wrote something down here that I love about in game theory, there's the finite and the infinite game. The finite game you play to win, and the infinite game you play to keep playing. And that's what I'm talking about, the pastel. How do you keep playing? And as a woman artist doing pastels in Santa Fe in the 70s and 80s, the guys I showed with, their paintings are now $80,000, but they have to keep doing it. They have to go to dinner with people. They have to be the artist. And my prices just went skimming along, where it was like a desk job. I made enough money like a regular job. But I can say, I think I'll do something else now. And what I'm doing now is I'm volunteering up at the opera in the costume shop, and I'm having so much fun. But I'm not obligated to be Maggie Muchmore. And that's part of it. That's to play to keep on playing. I love that. Okay, this is way back here. Okay, I wanted to talk about blue. Boy, do I love blue. And you know pastels and blue are just the best. You can get that pure, pure ultramarine color. I'll tell you at the end all my favorite blues. But I get my pastels from Dakota Pastel, now that you can just order. And the groupings that are worth getting are the ultramarine blues. They're just fantastic. That's what the sky is here. I made cards with all the different blues and shuffled them around because I wanted the whole sky. You know the difference between looking at the edge and the up above. It's such a huge range, and no one painting can really get it because it looks totally phony. But if you play with it like this, and you do all the completely different blues, it's very, very thrilling to me. Okay, the other thing I have, the note I have on this is a map of seeing. That little kid's looking for the invisible, who's staring and staring and staring. This is how I see the bosque, how I experience it. And it's the different moods, it's the action of the birds. I'm trying to get the sound in here, the sound of the birds, if you've ever seen them take off like that. And I was at Munson Gallery in Santa Fe for 13 years, and the man who ran it had a real problem with the way I did the bosque. He said, "It doesn't look like that, it's just very pale." And I wanted to say, "No, you're very pale." So I left. And I left in one of those, I'd rather work at Burger King leaving. But I found another wonderful gallery run by a woman, and Jane Kent. It was a fabulous gallery that showed beautiful crafts and paintings. And she grouped things. So, our friends who move here from Texas who say, "I'll take two." That's why I always frame the same, because there are lots of people coming here from Texas who, when they're buying, want more than one. My favorite thing is in the shop where I worked, it had Guatemalan jackets that were red and just covered with embroidery. They're a group of friends from Houston. They were hilarious. And they said, "Let's all get them so we can wear them together." Now, from New York City, you are not going to see that. You're not going to see it in California. So the "I'll take two" part is very cool. John, how did I get started on this? More than one. Larry Munson. Jane Kent put together beautiful things so people would buy the whole thing. They'd buy the chair, they'd buy the painting, they'd buy all of it. And my friend said, "What are you doing in a craft gallery?" I said, really, beautiful craft. It are partners to beautiful art.
The answer is selling.
That's right, absolutely. There's no question about it. And if you're shown how they enhance each other. I love that. Okay, let me get on here. Okay, so this is just how my studio looks when I'm working on something. That's the whole series of the feminine that I was working on. And I had to pose, if you're in the studio, your model is yourself. So I loved making costumes and dressing up. And I worked from dreams I had had, and John would take my picture. That bottom triptych is of winter, which I just love this. You see there's snow on the mountains, and it's not a dramatic time of year, and I love that. However, I have failed miserably at noon. I'm not good at noon. I love shadows. Shadows define. I see from the shadows out, the shape of the shadows. And since I work so big, I obviously don't do large work ethic, but I always do sketches. And I have a shorthand for a pinon or a juniper or different flowers. I have a really fast sketch that I can do on the back of a deposit slip to remember. And then the hard part, of course, is remembering the color that's not in the photograph. The time of day, I was lucky to get to talk to Wilson Hurley. I don't know if any of you ever knew him. He was brilliant. He was really brilliant. And he was into the rods and the cones in your eyes. And he loved the time of day that's unphotographable, right before dark. And where the camera just sees dark and sees light. But he could remember those colors really, really well. And there's a green, it's like a viridian green, that is just, look at his work in the Albuquerque airport. He was a color master. And one of the things he liked to look at, like the little girl looking at the water, is the ridge line looks darker. Your eye sees it as darker because it's right next to the sky. And then when you photograph it, it enhances, it doubles the dark. And then when you paint it and photograph the painting, then you're really messing with what actually was there. And his work holds that in it. And I think of him, remember this color, how you remember a color. I love, okay, this is my grandma. See that old lady peeking out there? She had 9 locks on her front. This is one of the ones, why doesn't the Lord take me? Well, she was sure there were robbers around the corner. And would ring the doorbell and she'd say, who is it? I'd say, it's us, Grandma. And she wasn't quite sure if the robber might be saying, it's us. So that's her peeking through the lace curtains. And the lace curtains, I used a lace curtain and I used charcoal dust and then took it off. And then I sprayed it and then I took it off. That was fun. Then the upper right, that's melancholy. And that's, one of the broodiness of melancholy. Depression's not the right word, it's melancholy. And it comes with being an artist. And it's how to deal with it and how to go through it and how to come out the other side. So I did that series I bought black wings at Party City. I love acting these things out. Okay. Now these are cards. These are paintings that I had made into cards because will be my 8th year working in the costume shop at the Santa Fe Opera. And I'm having so much fun I can hardly stand it. This is called The Approach to the Valkyrie. Everything is named after opera in some ways. And it's the best views in Santa Fe from the back deck of the opera, or that whole area. And what you do is you get 2 weather systems over the Jemez and over the Sangres. So right there, they're totally different clouds. That was my favorite thing. We lived in El Rito for 3 years when we were first here, and the summer of love is when we showed up here. A misnomer if I've ever heard it. It was a strange time in El Rito. But when I could see 3 different storms going on, it was just the most thrilling thing. And here in this area, you get to see it. Now these, I obviously have exaggerated, of the walking rain coming across from Los Alamos that just goes flying over the opera. But when these paintings that I'm going to show you, and these are my latest work, and these are 30-40. And when they go into cards, people look at them and they say, oh, those are such beautiful photographs. I say, look a little closer. Those are my hands in there. It's scribbly. It looks like a thunderbird. But what I know is true, and I play with it, is the way we see is if you get the ridge line correct, you can scribble all you want and people will read it as literal. And I do this. So I'll show you more. This is a close-up of my fingers. These are Diane Townsend Taraj Blues, the ultramarine. And they have silica in them. So I still work on Canson paper, and because it keeps the life, and I can layer, 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 layer. And I can work big. I love working big. So those blues are so pure that they open up the paper with the silica, and they're just, well, it doesn't actually show there that much. Believe me, it's great. Okay, this is called Opera Prelude. This is, there used to be all white petunias at the opera because John Crosby's mother liked white petunias. And this is looking out over the prop shop, just right before the opera starts. And this is one where I had to remember the colors. And as you know, one of my favorite things about clouds is that the bottom of the cloud reflects the color of the land here. You don't see that other places. And those warm reds will reflect on the bottom of the clouds. This is out over, that color. That's not the color. That's not it at all. It shows on this. It shows on this. Those clouds are lavender underneath. That's okay, but it's something else. Okay, these are the wind divas, those baffles. Now this I have in there because these have my Pignon shorthand, the scribbled Pignon shorthand. And again, the clouds, my favorite thing. And keeping the most bizarre color I use is the acid green for the light on a Pignon. You can scribble with the color of my shirt, this olive color, and then that acid green is the color of the light. It's not really there, but if you do it, it looks right because it's the look of the sunlight. And you know how much orange there is in the Pignon trees. That's what I was telling Susan and people this morning about when I, on this very stage, as I remember, I had judged the national show. They asked me to come back and tell people why they hadn't gotten in.
Oh, gee.
Why their child had been rejected. I was so nervous. But I thought, I have this idea that as an artist, I have an obligation to the community to represent an artist. Because for a lot of us, we're the only artists people know. So you're representing being an artist. And that's just, kind of how I was raised. So I thought, no, I have an obligation to go back there and figure out what to say. But the number one problem was the wrong green for New Mexico. Yeah. And green will tell you what altitude something is, how much chlorophyll is in it, what time of year it is. There are different greens in Taos from the greens in Santa Fe. Taos has, in the atmosphere, there's more lavender. These are all questions, the little girl looking at the glass of what's different about, why does Taos look so different from Albuquerque? What colors are different? And there's certain signature colors. There's a lavender in Taos, and there's a dark blue of the mountains that's not here and it's not in Santa Fe, that nails a place. It just gets it right. And the wrong green sends you to Iowa or New Jersey or Florida. And you know that if you spend a lot of money on a pastel set, you're not going to use more than 2 greens in it, maybe 3. they're for somewhere else. So the Terry Ludwig greens are fabulous. They have a series that are dull greens or something like that. But every single one in there you can use with impunity, and you won't be traveling all over the country. And then the other thing that was why a lot of paintings, one of the main reasons the things didn't jury into the show is just dumb luck and chance. What if you did a painting of a certain mesa and 12 other people did? It's dumb luck that these few got there before you. You know, you go back and when I did them, there were slides. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. I could jury myself out of a show. I mean, seriously, if it doesn't fit. My work tends not to fit in a show, because when I went and I hung my pieces as the judge, and we were going around, we were looking at all these beautiful little gems, and all of a sudden, we got to mine and it went, it was scratching my eyes out because I was too close to it. I'm doing something different. So I would have juried myself out of that show. It just didn't fit. And the other thing is, if something's going to be distorted, to make sure it looks like you did it intentionally. And that's like, if something's off, you can really play with it, but it has to really look like you meant to have it look like that. These are called angel clouds. My favorite compliment is when someone says, I saw some Maggie clouds the other day. And they tell me that about this piece. People are sucker for sunsets, you know that's true. I know which card sells fastest, and okay, I wanted to get to this. This is Grass Mountain. I was doing this triptych for a friend who's a hiker. And what I've done is I work in thirds so you don't sift on your own work. Number one problem with beginning pastel people, you sift on your own work. You blow it, a beautiful crisp thing, you've blown it. Don't blow it. This is butcher paper. Butcher paper has wax on the back of it. And this is artist tape. So I did the top third first. And it has to be totally done. And then I take it off and I do the next third. And on a big piece like this, you keep it fresh. When I did the patchwork pieces, I covered it all with butcher paper, except the little section I was working on. That's how I kept it clean. And then at the end, it was a big surprise when I did the reveal, because I wanted a chance to be part of it. But I mix with erasers, and I'll show you my erasers here, but any gum eraser, I don't rub pastel. It keeps, if color comes off, you're losing color. You're losing the intensity. So if you use one of those gum erasers and you can mix with all sorts of life in it, it keeps the color in it and it doesn't dull out. So this woman was a hiker. So the center from here to here is true. It's the back of the ski basin. And my husband helped me because he's a hiker, which peak is which, and he knew her favorite walks because they'd hike together. And she'd always wanted this picture of Grass Mountain. She's 75 and she's still hiking. She said, someday I'm not going to be able to hike. I want something to stare at that I can walk through. So that's what this was. The right panel and the left panel are true-ish. Then these grasses, to keep the life in them, there's just scribble, 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 and then go back with the eraser pencils, scribble, scribble, back and forth, back and forth. And then, let's see. This shows you up close how it erases back in. And she wanted certain flowers that, this has a range of about maybe 6 months of bloom times. Because, you know, it's a personal piece, it's not a literal piece. And this, it's a very rare orchid that only blooms once every so many years, and she was so thrilled when she'd seen that orchid. So I stuck that in. And there's a field of iris over on the right. But this is, I picked back in. These are erased, that's the paper. It's a sand color paper. And then I drew in all the negative spaces here. And back and forth with the negative and positive. And if the eraser's good enough, you can go over and just put more grasses over it. But it's the same process as using the pastel. Then, that's Old Eve. And she got wise. She's wearing the Garden of Eden. Those are all the, you know, the fabrics that everyone else, and that's my face done with, you know, I drew myself old by putting tracing paper over it. And when wrinkles come, they're old friends. I've done it for years. But she's got the wisdom, she's got the keys. Yes, she bit the apple, but she got wise. So, any questions? Yes?
The erasers you're talking about, pencil erasers or art gum erasers, what exactly are they? All right,
You know these plastic erasers?
the white ones.
The white plastic erasers?
Oh, yeah.
Those are my favorite to draw with. And you can cut them so that they've got points. And then these pencils. It looks like a pencil, but it's an eraser. And you can really draw with these. And then regular, you know, I cut them up because if I'm working on a big area and I want to blend something, I drag an eraser all the way across. And you can wash them, but they're better to keep pretty clean and then reuse them. But erasers, and then I want to show you my favorite pastel. They don't even make them anymore. This is Sennelier. Look at this. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Look at the size. Wow. Isn't that fabulous?
They're making them again.
Dakota just
They're
sent
making
me
it
Dakota.
next size smaller.
Oh,
Yes.
just one size smaller.
One size smaller, but these are the best. Because you get the wide stroke.
Right.
And for the foreground, when you're doing, you know, broad foreground, these just work like crazy. And I've had this for years. This was $22 in the 90s. But okay. I always thought you can never have too many pastels. Well, actually, you can. You can have too many pastels. But these are well worth it. And the new ones, they're a little small, and I saw it on Dakota.
Yes.
Yeah, they're really worth it. And they have all of these good earth colors, New Mexico earth colors. And then the sky, they've got very good ultramarines and cobalts. And those are worth investing in any time. And then, oh, yes, I was going to tell you my favorite pastels. I love the Terry Ludwig sets. You know, they have darks. He's got the best darks. Sennelier doesn't have enough darks that really get shadows. Wait a second. I always use Sennelier. I love them. And you know, my working with new pastels when I was a kid, I still have things, they're still there, but they've been in drawers long enough that I can't tell you if they're, you know. I have used pastels, of course, a lot of the yellows and the cream colors that I see to work on someone's wall that I haven't seen in ages, and they have faded. It's really tricky with the lights, but I just buy the best quality pastels I can, and there you have it. Schminky, I love Schminky. Diane Townsend, the Tirage has the pumice in it, and she's got the best blues. Terry Ludwig, the darks, the intense darks, the violets and the grays. Those single set violets and grays, they are unbelievably good. And for clouds, the whites and pale colors, you can really get clouds for those. They're so subtle. For fixative, I swear I think it's a placebo. I have to use it for my framer. It has to be, but it doesn't really work. You have to believe that it works more than it does. That's what I mean by a placebo. I did it. Okay, here's the biggest trick. Never, ever, ever spray something if the spray's cold. That's where you get the dots. You know, every once in a while it spits. It's cold. Don't heat it up, but just many disasters. That's when we found out where the dots came from. I ruined paintings in the early days with that. But I do like the Latour. What really works for me is when it's done, I shake them like crazy. And then I put glassine over it and rub, like you're doing a rubbing, and just press it in. That the whatever's in the glassine, the waxy part of it, just pushes the pastel in. And that's been my best thing. And I found that out because when I was doing shows and I stacked things, the things at the bottom were really good. And that's because they had been pressed down for a long time. So after you've pressed it in, then if you shake it again, that's been my best. And then of course framing it with a little, gutter. That seems to work the best. Butcher paper, much cheaper than glassine, but for working I like that. Artist tape, of course. Air, I love air. You can blow off a line with that computer air. The one with the little red line. You can take a line off.
Set it deep within your lungs too, right?
I run away. Running away is very good. I can't work with a mask, I know. I'm alive.
When I do these films, I have to put the little disclaimer on the bottom.
Please. Let's say, I do put a mask on when I'm spraying, and I do put a mask on but you see, I don't blow my pastels. So it's not in the air. I do that sifting thing. So that's so I don't have to have pastel in the air. And of course I have an HVAC system in my studio, which is great. This is the number one thing that I keep forgetting to say, is you've got to know your subject. If you're doing a portrait of someone you've never met, it's a disaster. Because you don't know if it's true. Well, the same thing with a landscape. If you're working from someone else's photo, if you weren't there, it's a disaster. You can't remember anything because there's no memory to call up. It's not in the photo. It's in your experience and it's in your memory. And so when I travel, I do watercolor. I love little tiny watercolors. I have here the downside of pastels and the upside of pastels, so I thought I'd share with you. The downside is glass, right? And it's heavy, and having to frame it and having to lift it. And the pricing too. You can only get a certain price for pastels, and that's just the way the market is. I've pushed it with my triptychs by making it bigger and bigger and showing in contemporary galleries. But after a certain point, as I say, when you get above $10,000, you have to go to dinner at someone's house. You have to be the artist. You have to be the artist. And it's not very portable. And the upside is just the joy of working with all that color. They're just, I find pastels just really joyous, being able to go bam, getting it right on. Cleaning up is really easy. My lovely teacher, you remember Mrs. Tyler, told me if you're going to have a career and have children, work with pastels. Because if there's a disaster, you can drop everything. And we had twins, and she was right. I always worked with earphones on, and the kids knew if I had earphones on, I wasn't there, but I could hear a disaster. And the other thing is it's really good for our climate, for a dry climate. I mean, it matches New Mexico. I would never do an ocean scene with pastels. I know other people do, but for me, it's, you know, and they're beautiful. I've seen a lot of beautiful ocean scenes with pastels, but I don't know the ocean, so. And then it's a good practice. It's a very good practice. Even when you're not selling, before you're selling when you're a kid, when you're old, when you're doing other things, it's an excellent practice. That's it. I have a book here of my work that, you know, with old-fashioned photos. Are there any more questions? Yes?
When you're framer, you're working on Canson exclusively. What do they do with those big sheets of Canson so that they don't?
I work on the board.
Oh,
It's already
Canson board
mounted.
So you're working sort of on what some of us consider the wrong side, that they consider the right side, with the waffle pattern.
I work on the waffle pattern. And I'll tell you the problem with that is it doesn't photograph the way a smooth surface works. So making a poster, it bothers people seeing the pattern.
Right.
But too bad.
Do you use museum glass? Is that what?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
It turns out, you're not kidding.
Yeah.
It's worth it. There's a new museum glass that, no, I don't use the most expensive museum glass. I use the kind. Can you go to the mic? We can't hear you. Yeah, thank you. I don't use the new museum glass, it's extraordinarily expensive. What used to be the best is less expensive now, and it's worth it. It's really, really clear. So, you're right, it is expensive, that's one of the downsides. And you know, I don't have any problem with reflections, because I did it. And I like reflections, and I like seeing my garden reflected in my painting. But people who bought your work don't want to see their garden in your painting. So that's why, one of the reasons. But having seen my work that is maybe 30, 40 years old and it still looks fine, hey, that's enough for me. I mean, this is not investment art. It's not, yeah, and of course investment art isn't an investment art anyhow, so the game's over. Any more questions? Thank you.